So, South Africa is in the news headlines again over the rift between the ANC and the Trump administration. Recently, a refugee processing center was shut down by the South African officials. The official reasoning was that there were Kenyan migrants illegally working there. But in reality, and what most people believe, is that it was a political message from the ANC to both the Trump administration and white South Africans. The entire South African refugee program under the Trump administration is one big public relations nightmare for the South African government, and it's not one it wants to deal with. Of course, it has no desire to deal with the root causes of the issue that led to this program in the first place. At the same time, the South African government does not want the bad publicity or the potential loss of financial privileges and assistance it receives from the United States. So, the solution it has come up with for now is to simply legislate the problem away. The processing center shutdown is a prime example of that approach. South Africa is a country with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of illegal migrants. This number is high because there's very little desire from the current South African government to prevent illegal entry into the country. So it makes no sense for the government to suddenly arrest Kenyan workers at a refugee center on the basis of immigration status, unless they are being targeted for other reasons. Now, here's the issue. If you're a country run as poorly as South Africa, sooner or later you're going to attract international attention. Not just because you're dysfunctional, but because you have a long way to fall if things collapse. People are often perplexed by South Africa when they look at the statistics on paper. It's one of those more advanced countries in terms of infrastructure, GDP, and legal systems, yet it suffers from crime levels, dysfunction, and corruption that's only associated with some of the most impoverished third world countries. So things just don't add up. The reality is that the underlying numbers on crime, corruption, and dysfunction are far more representative of the country than GDP figures and fancy buildings. But if you're in a country with this situation, you don't want people to know that. You don't want the world to see how bad things are, because that leads to less investment, less credit flowing into the country, and this whole fiasco with the United States is one big headache for the South African government that it does not want to deal with because it's going to affect its bottom line. Now, you might ask, why not just fix the situation by addressing the concerns of the president? Well, that's much easier said than done, because the current South African government is running two facades. One is a foreign relations facade, where it must present an image of respectability despite the fact that its underlying numbers painted as a banana republic in a fancy suit. The other, and more important facade, is the internal one aimed at its own citizens. You see, most South Africans, black or white, know the country is a mess. The lack of safety alone puts it on par with active war zones. Citizens can see the crumbling infrastructure, the blackouts and the load shedding, as well as the mismanagement and corruption across every sector of government service. So people know the reality. To deflect the attention, the current South African government needs a scapegoat to blame for all these problems. White South Africans who own farms are the perfect scapegoat. Not only is there already widespread resentment towards them within the South African cultural zeitgeist, reinforced by songs like Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, but they also fit in an easy problem-solution narrative. The quote-unquote problem is framed as too much wealth in the hands of white South Africans, and the quote-unquote solution is confiscating that wealth without compensation. This narrative gives every black citizen a so-called magic bullet they can wait on to solve the country's problems. Of course, that's how the ANC thinks it works in theory, but in reality, this won't solve anything, and most South Africans, black or white, aren't buying it. But the current government continues to push it because it has no other ideas to distract from its incompetent mismanagement of the country. The Trump administration, however, is making it increasingly difficult for this narrative to continue. The South African government cannot afford further alienation from the United States. Sooner or later, it will affect how other countries do business with South Africa, creating even more problems for an already failing state. At the same time, the government cannot abandon its stance towards white farmers because that stance is one of the few things keeping it in power during elections. It's important for the ruling party not only to confiscate white-owned farms, but to do so slowly, so the issue can be used as a political tool for as long as possible. Going forward, the strategy will likely be to shut down these centers and try to keep the issue under the rug until a new US president is elected. Once that happens, the government won't have to worry too much about being exposed internationally for the basket case it has turned South Africa into. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to click like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.